briefed with photos from
multiple
the inside?
times.
Multiple
I mean, he's
times.
been briefed multiple times about immigration, and often has regular sets of questions for his teams.
So, what is his concern about this being a super spreader event where you've got 400 kids stuffed into a pod built for 260?
These kids are tested. If they need to be quarantined, they are quarantined. We also follow CDC guidelines to ensure that they are kept safe. One of the reasons that it took us some time to have some of these facilities or some of the shelters open to larger groups of kids is because we wanted to follow those CDC guidelines. So we certainly don't see it through that prism. We actually took the steps we did to keep these kids safe.
But where else in the country would it be okay to have 400 people in a space for 260 during the pandemic?
Well, again, Peter, we're closely following the CDC guidelines. That's why we're opening up additional facilities, why they've been at limited capacity in a number of these shelters.
But if I may, I don't know that there are CDC guidelines that say you can be open
For
with
the, are you talking about the
400
shelters, or are you talking about the Border
the
Patrol?
Border Patrol facility.
Apologies, I was
Yeah.
misunderstanding your question.
Yes.
Look, I think our objective is to move. This is one of the reasons this is such a focus every single day for the president and this administration. We want to move these kids as quickly as possible through these facilities and into the shelters where there is safe spacing, and then move them into homes where there is safe spacing. And we are concerned about the public health impact. That's why we're putting in place a number of policies to expedite these processes.
But at that first stop, it's just not happening. And that is part of the federal government that you guys are in charge of.
Well, again, I think I've outlined for you specifically even a number of steps that we have taken and we are taking to expedite processing at the border, to ensure we're expediting the timeline, because these Border Patrol facilities are not made for children. We want to move them in part because of COVID, in part because they're not places that have the educational, the health resources, and other resources that we believe these children should have access to. That's where all of our focus is on, and why we're working to expedite things. We have a plan. We're implementing it, and we're confident we're going to be successful. We just have limited time, so I just want to go ahead.
A couple questions on the vaccine, Jen. Assuming that AstraZeneca gets the green light from the FDA, what's the administration's plans for distributing that vaccine?
Well, we don't want to get ahead of the FDA approval process, which I'm sure you certainly understand. And certainly for any vaccine that's approved, we would integrate it into our distribution process, equitably.
Is there the sense that the U.S. would have enough supply from the other 3 vaccines, that the AstraZeneca supply could all be shipped overseas? Would that be a plan from the administration?
I wouldn't jump to that conclusion at this point. There are obviously a number of factors, including the fact that these variants are unpredictable. We're still at war with the virus. We don't know which one is going to work best with children. And so that's one of the reasons the president and this administration wanted to be as prepared as possible and ensure we had a range of options at our disposal.
You had said on Friday that plans were not finalized yet on sharing vaccines. Do you have anything more to update on that today?
No, first, we are committed to, the U.S. has been, as you know, because you've covered it closely, one of the hardest hit countries in the world. More than 500,000 people have died. 1,400 people continue to lose their lives every single day. As I noted, there are still a number of factors that are unpredictable that we need to plan for to the best of our ability, including the variants and the impact and what will be most effective, as well as what will work best with children. We are, as we get increasing confidence that we have enough vaccine, we will explore options for sharing more broadly. We want to largely be a part of the global solution here. We recognize fully that in order to defeat the pandemic globally, the global community needs to be vaccinated, but there's a shortage of supply at this point around the world, but also including around the country still. And as you know, because you all talk to governors and other elected officials, they are still looking for supply. There's still people who want the vaccine who don't get the vaccine. We are not sitting on a secret dose of supplies. We are focused on getting these out the door as quickly as possible at this point.
One more. The president on Friday seemed to suggest that he thinks you could double the goal. 100 million shots in the first 100 days already hit. And he said, we hope we can keep the pace, 2.5 million a day, maybe able to double it. Is the new goal now 200 million shots before day 100?
We don't have a new goal to set. Our team is looking at that. We certainly want to put one out publicly once our health and COVID team has taken a look at what's viable, and hopefully we'll have more on that soon. Go ahead, Josh.
Can I ask a follow-up the meeting over the weekend and last week with the Chinese
Sure.
delegation in Alaska? Did the president get what he wanted out of that meeting? Does he have any response to what came from it? And where does it leave the countries now going forward? For instance, is the prospect of some sort of bilateral meeting between President Biden and President Xi now more or less likely? Is there anything you can give us on that?
Well, we expected tough and direct talks with the PRC on a wide range of issues, and that's exactly what happened. And I know there's been a lot of focus on some of the public theatrics or more dramatic public piece, but I can assure you from talking to our national security team that it was a substantive meeting. It was a 2-day meeting. They covered a range of issues from our concerns about human rights abuses to aggression in Hong Kong, Taiwan, our concerns there, our concerns about economic and intellectual property. And we also, of course, talk about ways we can work together. So we're taking stock of where we are. This is where we are now. I expect the president will certainly be talking with his national security team, well, Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, who traveled, and we will have close consultation with allies and partners on the way forward. We'll continue to work with China, of course, going forward, where it's in the interest of the American people. But in terms of the next steps, Anchorage was a standalone meeting, and we don't have anything more to determine about what's next.
And today the U.S., EU, and other countries announced new sanctions on China with respect to human rights abuses. Did anything that happened in Anchorage affect that? In other words, would the U.S. have not participated in that, had certain conditions been met? Is there any link between the two? And what next steps do you think? China has retaliated against the EU. Do you expect U.S. retaliation? And is there any more sanctions that you would do if they don't act to change course with respect to the treatment of these minority groups?
Well, on the first question, I'm not aware of any linkage or plans to pull that back. Obviously, this was a reaction to what we felt were serious human rights abuses. Obviously, the Europeans felt this as well against members of Xinjiang's ethnic and religious minority groups. No meeting would change our concerns related to that. And we took action, as you noted, in unity with the United Kingdom, Canada, and the European Union, who also acted against human rights abusers in connection with these atrocities. This demonstrates our ongoing commitment to work multilaterally to advance respect for human rights. And we continue to have grave concerns about China's crimes against humanity and genocide on Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But I don't have anything to predict for you on future sanctions. Obviously, this is an issue that was raised in this meeting last week and was an issue that was raised by the president in his conversation with President Xi just a few weeks ago.
What will the U.S. do, if anything, if China doesn't change its approach? Is this sort of a one-stop sanction, or down the road will this be revisited and are further sanctions possible? I mean, they've given no indication that they would change approach. In fact, they have more or less doubled down that they're doing nothing wrong with respect to these minority groups.
Well, clearly sanctions are meant to deter behavior, but I'm not going to rule in or rule out any actions when we're at not even day 60. What day are we at? 62? I'm not even sure. Of the administration, I can assure you that obviously this is, again, we will be evaluating what the appropriate next steps are in close coordination with our partners and allies around the world. And as Secretary of State noted in his comments after this meeting, we are certain that the Chinese are noting that we are working much more closely with our allies and partners than had happened over the last 4 years, that we are focused on taking steps to invest in and improve our economic competition here at home. Those are all steps we're certain they're taking note of.
Sorry, very briefly,
Go
on
ahead.
the Guatemala trip, the president's proposal for $4 billion in aid for the Northern Triangle has made allusions to conditions that might be placed on it, reforms, anti-corruption effort, that sort of thing. Is this something that Ambassador Jacobson will raise at all? In other words, are you going to be seeking changes in exchange for any funding, aid funding that might go to the region during this trip? Will you specify any particular asks in that regard?
That's a great question. I will also note that there's also a part of the trip, a delegation, as our new special envoy for the Northern Triangle, who I'm certain will be playing a prominent role in leading these efforts and negotiations moving forward. Obviously, addressing issues like corruption, violence in the region and in these countries is something that is often raised with the government because we need to work through this funding mechanism through the immigration proposal with our own Congress. I don't have anything to kind of detail for you in terms of what those conversations will look like, but I'm sure when they come back, we will do a robust readout of their conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Why hasn't the administration sought a supplemental funding to send resources to the border to help the migrant children, the unaccompanied minors? Is that something that's in the offing?
Well, I know Secretary Mayorkas has spoken to this exact question, which is a great one, and what he has conveyed is that the funding is not the root issue here, that there are larger issues or issues that we have been focused on working through, including processing, identifying additional facilities that we think will help address the challenges we're seeing at the border.
Okay. On vaccine distribution, I know that there are these two bilateral deals with Mexico and Canada. Mm-hmm. I know that you aren't ready to talk about lots of vaccine sharing around the globe, but is the administration planning to emphasize bilateral agreements on vaccine sharing globally, or are you expecting to ultimately put doses into COVAX?
We, of course, remain committed to working through COVAX. We provided the most funding to COVAX of any country in the world with $4 billion. Mexico and Canada, as you all know, are our neighbors, and so there is a great deal of traffic that can go back and forth between these countries. So it made sense in those scenarios to do bilateral lending agreements, for lack of a better phrasing. But in terms of future, I expect it will be a combination, but certainly we will continue to be a contributing, supportive member of COVAX.
Just one follow-up on the Tsarnaev question and Boston bombing. Will the president, we're trying to understand why the Department of Justice continued to move forward with this appeal if President Biden's position is that he has grave concerns about the death penalty. And has President Biden or will President Biden talk to the Attorney General about this case, possibly DOJ consider changing its appeal?
I don't have anything to preview for you on that front. The president also believes that the Department of Justice is an independent institution, and of course there are times where it is appropriate to have conversations, but I don't have any conversations to preview for you with the Attorney General.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
As has previously been discussed, there are some families who are being released from facilities into the United States. They're not being given court dates or paperwork about how to complete the legal process. How is the administration going to ensure that they can follow that legal process and can be tracked down to make sure that they show up in court or apply for asylum?
Are you talking about the limited families who are already in removal proceedings, or who it's already been determined that they are going to be sent back to their countries, or which? There are very, very limited numbers of families, very limited, who are tested. They are, but I'm not sure which families you're talking about. So maybe tell me a little bit.
What numbers are we talking about here?
It's a great question. I would just point you to CBP and DHS for the specific numbers. They release that data and they have it more at hand.
I mean more so when there's a certain capacity at some of these facilities on the border that they're being released and not being given paperwork about when to, show up. And the migrants who have spoken to our reporters on the border are confused about how to push forward their asylum claims and how to, pursue staying somehow.
I'm not familiar with the exact case. I mean, I'm not sure if this is one case, 5 cases. I'd be happy to connect you with the officials there who can go deeper dive on it with you. Okay, go ahead.
So it's been a year since the U.S.-Mexico border and the U.S.-Canada border has been closed. Are there any plans in reissuing guidelines, especially with the vaccine distribution and partnerships we have with both Canada and Mexico?
I don't have anything to preview for you. It's constantly, of course, reevaluated. We look at it through the prism of COVID and safety and obviously diplomatic relationships too, but I don't have anything to predict for you on that front. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Alex,
Thank you.
go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry. As a sort of amorphously pointing.
Will Secretary Austin